please mute your microphones. I think Remco already did that for everybody, so we won't be bothered by the background noise. That's it for all the practical stuff, and I would like to pass the microphone to Remco and Peter Hershock.
Well, thank you, Kitty. To start with, my name is Remco Pijpers, and normally you would see me now, but somehow AI recognized that I didn't have a very good night, and we don't want to scare you off. So you will only hear my voice today via the account of the Zen Center of Amsterdam, where I practice my Zen Buddhism. Peter Hershock, you're present as well. Can we see you? Can you say anything? You're still muted, Peter?
Yes, I have a habit of muting while I'm not talking so that background noise from here doesn't get to you guys. But yes, I am here and very happily so. Thanks.
Okay, well, good to have you. I will introduce you first. Peter is the director of the Asian Studies Development Program and the education specialist at the East-West Center in Honolulu, Hawaii. Most recently, he has helped launch the center's initiative on humane artificial intelligence with a focus on the societal impacts and ethical issues raised by emerging technologies. He's an authority on Asian and comparative philosophy, not only being a scholar in his chambers writing groundbreaking books, but also very active in the day-to-day world, talking to colleagues worldwide and having dialogues with young people. Last year, he was on Dutch television in a very moving episode of the Buddhistische Blik, making food, talking and meditating with youngsters. Very worthwhile to watch. I attended a Dharma lesson at the Zen Center Amsterdam about one of his earlier books, Liberating Intimacy, and I was inspired. I decided to buy the book, went to the online bookshop and did a search on his name. And to my surprise, I discovered that Peter very recently published a book about Buddhism and intelligent technology. I read the book and realized how important this book is. And perhaps it would have been better to take away the word Buddhism from the title, since one might think this is only relevant for people with a Buddhist background. And we'll find out why in the coming hour. Peter, welcome again. So nice of you to visit the lowlands digitally. You live and work on Hawaii in the States, but right now you're in Cambodia. Am I right? Cambodia?
That's correct. I'm in Phnom Penh, and I will apologize in advance if the internet connection turns out not to be as stable as we would like. If I end up breaking up too much, maybe one of you can alert me and I can turn off my video, and that might help if we're having any kind of communication problems because it'll reduce the bandwidth. But certainly very, very happy to be able to join you all. I had the great pleasure of going to the Netherlands a couple of times in the last 4 or 5 years. Found the people to be truly warm, and I'm just overly just joyed to know that there's so many people in the Netherlands who are willing to see the importance of the connection between Buddhism and intelligent technology, what we're going to be doing with our future. So thanks very much, Remco, for inviting me here.
Yeah, your expertise is Chinese Buddhism, Chan. And you lead a center in Hawaii, and you lead a meditation practice for almost 40 years right now. Can you tell us a little bit more before moving to technology about your background in Buddhism? How did you get involved?
Right. Well, I should correct that. I've been a practitioner for some 40 years, but I don't lead a meditation group in Honolulu. I'm actually a disciple under Qigong de Bubsnin, who heads up the Yunhua flower ornament tradition of social Buddhism, based with the main monastery being on the Big Island in Hawaii, and then a group of centers across Europe. So if you are interested, you can look up the Lotus Sangha online and find out information about De Bubsnin and the centers there in Europe. But I've been practicing under De Bubsnin since 1986. And prior to that, started with practice with Sim Sansen, another Korean Zen master. So he works in the Sun tradition, which is the Chan Zen tradition of Korea. And then Tepotsunin works with sort of a blending between what you might call in the Japanese tradition, Sentai, and Zen tradition. So it's an interesting sort of a hybrid approach, but very, very much oriented toward making Buddhism applicable to people with jobs and families and all the rest of it, in addition to those who want to devote themselves to the ordained life. So I've been doing that, yes, for about 40 years now.
Okay, and you already wrote about technology in the 90s. That you published a book back then. Also, what sparked your interest in technology?
Well, I've had an interest in technology for a long time. I mean, growing up, you've been told things like, chemistry is the future and electronics are going to revolutionize everything. But the interest in particular with digital technologies and communication technologies really came from being on the island of Bali. I think it was 1987, and I went there for a surf trip, typical young surfer guy. And was on Mount Agung and was talking to a couple of young kids from the village up there who were selling water to tourists. And they knew all about this television show, MacGyver. And they thought that I looked like him. And so they wanted to know if I was this TV character. And I was wondering, now, how can these village kids on this Indonesian island in the middle of the Indonesian archipelago, 10,000 feet above sea level on this volcano, how would they know about MacGyver? And it turns out that in their village, they had television set up on the weekends, and people would watch videotapes of American television programs, MacGyver being one of them. And when I asked them about their own sort of, Bali, if you don't know, is the only Hindu island in the entire Indonesian chain, which is primarily Muslim. But when I started asking them about their own sort of traditions, the Ramayana, for example, sort of the classic, epic tale in Hindu thought that they would have certainly had in Bali and that you could see all over in their artwork, they knew nothing about it. They didn't know any of the major characters. They didn't know the storyline. And I started thinking, now, how can that be that these Western media are already, as I thought of it at the time, colonizing the minds of these very young people, like 8 and 9 years old. So that sort of launched the research that I did that led to that first book, Buddhism, Reinventing the Wheel, Buddhist Response to the Information Age. And it was during that I came up with this idea that really what's happening through these digital media was what I refer to as the colonization of consciousness. Sort of building on where people are coming at from post-colonial theory, but taking it a step further and saying it's really not just about our explicit thoughts, the kinds of values that we hold or that we aspire to. It actually is a colonization of the very mechanism, as it were, the kind of organic structure of consciousness itself through this attention economy. So there's a connection between that earlier book and then this later book that just came out, the concerns of how artificial intelligence is playing into that transformation.
Yeah, can you elaborate more on that, on the very big leap from the information age to the intelligent technological revolution that you describe in your book?
Yeah, I think the simplest way to talk about it is to think in terms of a contrast between two forms of attention economy. The term attention economy is sort of coming into general parlance now, so more and more people are using it. I think Tim Wu has a couple of books out, one called The Master's Switch, and the other one I think called Attention Merchants, both of which are really great historical studies of how advertising in particular has transformed sort of the marketing of goods and services starting in the 19th century and working forward. And I think that he captures really well what's going on with the attention economy in that economic sense, and that's the capture and exploitation and pretty much the direct translation of attention into revenue through mass-mediated goods and services. So in the attention economy 1.0, you had mass advertising that was used to generate interest, capture the attention of larger audiences, and then capture their attention to a sufficient degree that you could sort of push them in the direction of buying mass-produced and mass-marketed goods and services. And it was pretty effective. If you look at how advertising transformed economic commercial behavior from the mid-19th century, especially up until the late 20th century, it's really a pretty remarkable rise. When you start looking at the amounts of investment in advertising, really, truly stunning. But then what started happening with these new technologies is rather than having mass marketing, these new technologies are actually able to identify us as individual consumers and to target us individually based on our search behavior online, our digital social media contacts, the content of what we're sharing online. Our emails can be looked into if you use Gmail. The content of your emails are observable. If you're using a smartphone, your location, what you're doing, and so on. So all of this data about us being generated through everything that we do that's connected with information and communication computing technologies. All that data is now being compiled and used to create what amount to digital simulations of each and every one of us. So it's not just that they take this data and say, okay, now we can more closely target what Sabine wants, or what is that Henny wants. I'm trying to look at the names and I don't have my reading glasses on. But sort of, it's not just looking at you as individuals, sort of as representatives of a class. What these mechanisms are doing is algorithmically taking your data and then turning it into a simulation so they can feed that simulation different responses for web search, for news feeds, and so on, and see how the simulation responds. Once they have a pretty good idea how this individual, this cloned or simulated individual operates digitally, then they try it on us and see how it works in real time. Not just against us as individuals, but us against other doppelgangers. So they've got people that are very much like us. You'd like to think of yourselves as an absolutely unique individuals. Well, you're not. All of us have lots of things that we share in common with others. And what the algorithmic intelligences are doing is comparing our conduct, digitally mediated, with other people's conduct that's very like us, and kind of playing us against each other. Trying things out on one person. If it works on them, try it out on me. If it works on me as well, then great, it works, bingo. If it doesn't work on me, then tweak it, try a little something different. If it works on me the second time, then try it on that first person, just to get a finer and fine tuning of things. So what's happened with the attention economy 2.0 is we've gone from a place of mass marketing of goods and services to large audiences, to a highly precise, very granular approach to not just knowing what we're likely to do, predicting us, but because these algorithmic systems have gotten so good at recognizing faces not just for who we are, but for what we're feeling, how we're thinking, what our responses are to the stuff that we're seeing or reading online, and then factoring that emotional analysis into what we're being fed, so that what we see is in the attention economy 2.0, it's not just epistemic power, the power to know who we are and predict what we're likely to want or to avoid, to desire, to be afraid of, but also an ontological power to shape our conduct.
Yeah, you write in your book that this is not only an industrial revolution, it's also a metaphysical revolution. Can you explain that?
I mean, you can't have that, right? You can't have a transformation like that occurring and not to have it force us, I think, to start asking very, very fundamental questions about the nature of freedom, about the nature, if you look at what's going on with the application of these systems, that's obvious in the 2016 elections, but the Brexit sort of exit vote, and with the United States presidential election in 2016, where Cambridge Analytica made use of huge amounts of data to individually manipulate the voting behaviors of people. If we live in a world where people's voting behavior can be shaped by algorithmic systems without their knowledge, it's not that you sign up for it and say, look, give me some more information about the candidates I'm interested in. This is completely behind the scenes manipulation of people's voting behavior. In that kind of world, we have to start asking really fundamental questions about what is the nature of freedom and free will? Is there really a contrast between free will and determinism? What is the nature of the human? And do humans have anything special in the way of intelligence that we can claim as particularly our own? We now have artificial systems that are producing art, pretty decent artworks, pretty decent music. Of course, it's mimicking. They don't necessarily feel what we're feeling when we're listening to music or producing art. But nevertheless, they're able to realize these products, and through realizing them, get a better sense of what it is we like, what we're afraid of, what makes us happy, and then to use that information in ways that we don't have control over. So there's huge metaphysical issues about things like freedom and will, the nature of consciousness, but then really political issues as well.
Yeah, and you say that that we're in the midst of an era defining shift from the dominance of problem solution to that of predicament resolution, a shift from the primacy of the technical to that of the ethical. Is that what you just meant? That it's not only a matter of solving problems, but it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, it is. And that's partly, I kind of get at the question in two ways. First, on this problem predicament distinction. The way that I define them, problems are pretty straightforward. You've been doing things, you have a certain aim, you have a certain set of interests, you've got some techniques that allow you to get there, certain practices that you engage in that allow you to get there. And then suddenly something goes wrong. You're no longer able to use your existing practices and techniques to get what you want. So what do? Well, you identify, you know where you want to go. You want to get back to the way it used to be. You want to get those values realized. You want those interests to be honored. You want to achieve the things that you wanted to achieve. And you figure out new means to getting there. That's problem solution. We know where we want to end up, and we just have to find new means of getting there. We know 25, 30 years ago that we needed to start reducing carbon in the atmosphere. Automobile industry kind of got on board. The visionary people said, hey, we want to solve the problem of carbon emission. How do we do that? Well, there's lots of different methods, but one is to have a hybrid electric engine where you got some battery power, you still have some gasoline, still use an automobile, but you can massively reduce the carbon output of automobiles using that new system. That's a great innovative solution to the problem of carbon emission. But predicaments are different. Predicaments occur when there are conflicts among our values, our interests, and our aims. These conflicts of values then can't be solved. Why? Because it's the very conflict among those values and interests that keeps us from predetermining what a solution would consist in. We can't predefine what it would mean to solve this kind of the issue that we're engaged with. Something, for example, like climate change. Climate change is a predicament. It's a conflict of economic values, environmental values, cultural values, political values. And it's that conflict of values that has kept humanity in the 50 or 60 years since we've known climate change is a real issue. We need to be dealing with it, and we have yet to resolve the predicament. So problems can be solved. Predicaments can't be solved. They can only be resolved. Where resolution implies two things in English. It's like the resolution of the digital image on the screen in front of you, the precision with which something's represented, and resolve in the sense of a firm commitment. So to resolve a predicament, what we need is great clarity about how things have gotten to be the way that they are. How did this values conflict come about? And then resolution, truly shared commitment to be able to reprioritize those values in order to find new pathways forward. So they're really strikingly different. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned climate change. That's a key example of a predicament. But intelligent technology is forcing us also to confront a huge array of predicaments.
Okay, thank you. Well, in your book, you say that the question you try to answer is who do we need to be present as to engage globally in the work of the shared predicament resolutions you just mentioned. And you take a deep dive into Buddhism, but also Confucianism and Socrates. Can you tell us more on a personal level in what way those perspectives can help us to relate to all those complicated issues, new issues?
Yeah, well, one thing to say kind of up front is that most of what we confront as conflicts, troubles, and sufferings in our day-to-day life, I mean, this is dukkha in the Buddhist sense, most of that comes from conflicts of values. I mean, we as human beings are not dumb enough generally to do things directly against our own interests. If something really is harmful to us, we generally avoid it unless we're masochistic. So when we have things that are occurring that cause conflict, trouble, tensions, etc., that's because we've had conflicting values. So teachings about karma and how to resolve karma are really teachings about how do you look at values conflicts and deal with those, where karma is understood as the consonance, the total consonance between patterns of our own values, intentions, actions, and the patterns of outcome and opportunity that we're experiencing. And so adjusting our actions is one way of dealing with the opportunities and the outcomes of our actions in the world and with others. But we can also adjust our values. And that's often the more crucial one, is adjusting our values and our intentions. So the difference between Buddhist understandings of karma and, say, pre-Buddhist Indian understandings of karma is the Buddha really drove home in this idea of it's about intentionality and values that really are what makes karma operative. The nice thing about it is karma is what assures us that enlightenment is possible, because we're not locked in, because we can always change our values, we can always change our intentions, we can always change our actions. So the patterns of outcomes and opportunities that are being realized, whether personally in our day-to-day lives or technologically through institutions and so on, those can all be changed. So I think what Buddhism brings to this is first an awareness that, look, we need to operate on the basis of really ethically, or in terms of values, critically addressing what's going on with these technologies. That's the first part.
Mhm.
We cannot evaluate them simply on a technical level. That just puts us back on the world of problem solution. You have a cell phone. Is it doing the job you want it to do? Are you worried about the privacy settings? Okay, I'm Apple. I'll give you new privacy settings you can deal with. But that's just dealing with the individual tool, not with the technology as a system of relational dynamics. So what Buddhism says is, look at the relational dynamics, basic teaching. Everything is empty. Nothing has an individual self-essence. How do things come about? Interdependently. And if you take that teaching really seriously, it really amounts to saying everything ultimately is relational. Relationality is more basic, ontologically, existentially, than things related. So if we're going to deal with issues like how intelligent technology is affecting the world, we need to take responsibility for that karmically and say, we really need to address the values conflicts, and those values conflicts begin in us. They don't just begin in the world at large, they begin in us, each and every one of us, and how we sort of pair together, how we're interdependent. So with Buddhism, you find this really interesting focus on personal experience, what's going on, say, in your family, your day-to-day life, and so on. And that's basic training, as I would see it, for scaling that up and looking at what's happening in societies at large. Because it's in our families that we have all the resources necessary to solve these values conflicts. If we can't resolve these predicaments in the family, it's almost impossible to resolve them outside the family. So what Confucianism is really good for is looking at those family dynamics and understanding how interpersonal relationships have hierarchies built into them, not pernicious hierarchies, sometimes really beneficial hierarchies, and to understand how that operates. Whereas the Socratic world says, look, it's not just about relational harmony, it's about relational integrity too. It's about doing the right things for the right reasons. And what Buddhism affords us, I think, especially important in the contemporary period, given this attention economy 2.0 and how it works, is to say what's crucial to either of those, either relational harmony or social integrity, is to bring together the best we can in terms of our attentive resources, to be as masterfully attentive as we possibly can. And that's where meditative practice and all the rest comes in.
Do you have an example of a personal value conflict concerning technology in your own life that somehow was solved by your practice? Did you have anything at hand on a personal level?
You know, I think for myself, I would kind of flip the thing around a little bit, because I'm a little unusual in the sense that I made a decision when I was 16 years old to have nothing to do with television. So I've never owned a television, and throughout my adult life, never watched a TV. I also made a decision pretty early on that mainstream radio was not worth my time because of the advertising, so I cut that out of my life. So I kind of went on the side of sort of the digital retreat. I went outside of all of that. And so for me, the transformation has been seeing how that really limited my ability to connect with other people and to be able to come back into and make use of these digital communication technologies in a way that hopefully would be expressive of the insights that I gained from kind of living outside that world for a while, to see the great value in it, but also to be able to see the perils in it. Mm-hmm. And so I think for me, it's been a real learning experience to go from somebody who refused to own a cell phone, had no TV, did not listen to mainstream radio or music, who did everything in this sort of bespoke manner, to saying, look, if I'm going to affect the world the way it is now, I got to start reintegrating. I got to connect myself in. I got myself a cell phone. I got myself the computer hookup. I started doing internet news reading, but being really careful about how to go about doing that. So I think not being a native to it has been really helpful in that respect. Now, where I find the struggles is working with my sons. If we want to talk about dealing with the new generation and trying to deal with the real values conflicts, then we can talk about that. But that really has to do with the combination of helping young people to realize that in their use of these technologies, they are being used by corporate, by state interests in order to do the things that corporations and states want and need them to do. And that very often what they're saying is, look, I'm freely doing this. It's my choice. And I say, choice is very slippery as a definition of freedom. And karmically, we want to really worry about that. And we could talk more about that if we want.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that very much. But first, I would like to give the people in the chat room or the people being present here the opportunity to ask their questions. I know one of the audience already sent 2 questions, Roland. I would like to ask him to unmute himself and ask a question.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Well, this is my question. I think you and I are convinced that there's an added value for human intelligence when compared to AI. Why then doesn't this advantage pay off for people?
Well, I think it's a complicated sort of a question in the sense that the difference between human intelligence and what are now emerging as synthetic intelligences. Artificial intelligence is something that I think we could have used that term up until maybe 10 or 15 years ago. But since we've started to develop these algorithmic learning systems, so machine learning, which is taking human data that we've produced as human beings, based on the attention that we put into this digital infrastructure, the internet and everything that's connected with it, our attention carries our intelligence. That is records of our decision-making, our adaptive conduct, what we're doing with our thoughts, with our emotions, with our actions and so on, as reported through these media. And as these learning systems get better and better at doing what they're being designed to do, they're actually incorporating our intelligence. So I think it's better that we call them synthetic intelligences. Where do we have a real advantage over these? I think that, you can sort of compare the state that synthetic intelligences are at now is a bit like savants who may be totally ignorant in every other respect other than, for example, mathematics. You've got these savants who are humans, who might be, kids, and you can give them a 7-digit number and a 5-digit number and tell them to multiply it, and they can do it in their heads like that. Well, these machines can do that as well. But you ask that same child to deal with a complex issue in their classroom about a bullying behavior, for example, and they may not know anything about how to deal with the bullying. And I think that's exactly where we're at with these synthetic systems now, these synthetic intelligences. In very, very narrow domains, they're quite good. But when you're asking them to go outside of that very narrow domain that they're trained to be good at, then they basically turn into ignoramuses. So some people would say there's no such thing as artificial intelligence, it's artificial ignorance. And in some degrees, that's true. If by ignorance, we just mean not seeing a bunch of things. So I think what human beings are especially good at now is what's referred to as general intelligence, where we're able to fluidly move between making art, to making dinner, to making love, to making a better society. And to do that in a way that no machine at this point is able to negotiate those very different relational domains. So the relational possibilities of these intelligences are extraordinarily limited. They're very precise. They're like lasers, but they're very, very limited. So how long will that last? We don't know. The best estimates are that something like AGI, artificial general intelligence, are maybe a few decades, maybe 100 years away. We're really not sure. But what we have are minimally conscious artificial intelligences, these synthetic intelligences that are now working among us, side by side with us, in businesses, in schools. They're everywhere now. They're on our cell phones. And what we want to do is to be able to develop relationships with these synthetic intelligences so that we nurture them along in ways that are more conducive to the realization of humane futures than I think the really relatively inhumane ones that we seem on track to realizing now, given the kinds of corporate and state interests that are currently invested in the design, development, and deployment of intelligent technology.
There's oh yeah, shall I?
Kitty, you
Yeah,
take over.
there's another question from Hester IJsseling. She asks, could you give a very concrete example of the freedom of a child being affected by digital technology? An example of how this phenomenon appears in everyday life.
Their freedom being affected?
Yes.
Is that the question? Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's say that a child wants to, like all children do, want to do something that's entertaining. They want to play. All kids want to play it. It may be, there were old theories of humanity that what's distinctively human is desire to play. Well, now we know animals play all the time too. But play seems to be part of intelligent activity. It's exercising conscious imagination in a kind of lighthearted sort of a manner. All kids want to do it. So let's say that you get a kid who's playing, I was using the example earlier today, birthday comes around and they're given a choice for a present and they say, I want a video game. And a video game is very entertaining. It's very little effort up front, unlike playing a sport, for example, where you have to actually develop a certain skill to be able to be good at it, to enjoy it. Unlike playing a musical instrument, same type of thing. It's a practice that you have to engage in for a while. Video games, you enjoy them from the very beginning. They've been designed to do that. So people who are developing games use children as test subjects, use themselves first, and then they use children as test subjects, hook them up to brain sensing devices, galvanic skin responses, and see what happens when they're playing different versions of the game. What maintains the interest of the child to the maximum extent? What keeps them coming back for more? In terms of what's presented on the screen, what elements of what are presented on the screen capture the child's attention by tracking the gaze of the child on the screen? Where do their eyes rest most? What's most interesting? And then use all of this information that they're gathering to redesign the game. When these games are launched commercially, they're already extraordinarily effective at grabbing kids' attention. And so when they say, I'm free to choose to play the game or not to play the game, it's not really the case. The playing field has been so sloped against them that once they start playing, it's like the addiction phenomenon. You do a little bit of it and you want to do more. People in the gaming industry, starting with places like Las Vegas, have understood this for generations. But what's different now is that these games are able to adjust themselves to individual players to keep them locked in, looking for the reward. And it's short-term reward. So what you're doing is you're inculcating within the child this propensity for looking for short-term, very fast reward on effort. Minimal effort, maximum return. Well, what happens when they go into a real classroom? Are they able to adapt with the kids? And we've seen over the last generation this rise of cases of so-called autism or autism spectrum syndrome. And that could just be a new medical diagnostic sort of a thing, where now we broaden the definition of autism so much that it includes a whole bunch of new people. Or it could be that the kinds of environments that these children are growing up in are ones in which they're really not developing the interpersonal skills, the skills of being able to freely do something that they might not get any instant gratification out of, which is generally associated with intelligence, not being encouraged to do that, but instead to continue to consume these games or media products that are instantly and immediately gratifying. It's training. It's training the body-mind system to desire that. So for the body mind, the Buddha talked about there being different kinds of food. One kind of food is what you put in your mouth. Another kind of food is what we breathe in. It's the air around us. Another kind of food is sensory information. So sensory information is a basic diet for sentient beings. It's part of what we're consuming to be sentient beings at all. And when you change that diet systematically, it's possible of reducing the freedom of children and adults to be able to make their own decisions. You'll have the impression you're making your own mind up. But all of your decision-making processes have been shaped to do that. Now, this is not new. I mean, this was happening in Nazi Germany. This is part of what all propaganda campaigns have done. What's distinctive about this is it's individualized, targeted, and working with our own personal data for the systems to get better and better at doing their job. That's really distinctively different.
Peter, does your son have the freedom to play video games?
You know, with him, he wanted to play like all the other kids his age. And we said, you know, look, we know we can't stop you because when you go to your friend's house, you're going to be playing them. So it's really up to you, but we're not going to buy one for you. If you want to own a video game setup, you will have to work for it. Save your own money. You work long enough, you can buy one. It took him 2.5 years to buy a video game to get the setup that he wanted, doing chores around the house and all the rest. And when he did, he ended up playing some of the less like first-person shooter games. He was doing Minecraft and those games that are more about imaginative building spaces initially. And then he kind of lost interest in it. You know, he had a phase of about 2 years when all of his friends were into it. He just lost interest and got into sports and music instead. So I think the early, as I would put it, inoculation of not having from age 2 or 3 getting into these systems and waiting until he was basically 9, 10 years old before he started playing, I think was a bit like a vaccine. It kept him from being as deeply infected as he might have been by the digital bug.
And what would be a good way to help children to deal with the influence from digital developers? Because
you know, I think as far as dealing with the influence, it's really hard because the gaming industry is a huge industry. If you take gaming and entertainment industries together, in terms of the global economy, they now surpass the energy part, the standard energy part of the economy, that is oil, coal, solar, et cetera. You take all of what's going on in terms of energy production planet-wide, in terms of GDP, and what's being done by the entertainment and gaming industries, and entertainment and gaming are way beyond. So that's the real fuel of the economy, and that's a huge force to try to work against. But I think that with kids, what I at least did with my own sons, is to say, really consider where your decision is coming from. When you say that this is what you want to do, ask yourself the question, where did the thought come from? And that requires a bit of basic meditative ability. I mean, it's not easy to do that. It's not easy for an adult to do that. It's really hard for kids to do that because their minds are all over the place. But if you can kind of get them to do something where they realize the payoff of consistent activity and ask them and say, look, you engaged in this thing that took you a week to be able to pull off, whether it's art or it's something in the garden or something that they can do physically, and see what the payoff is. Then they learn from that, okay, there's this interactive process. I make a certain kind of effort, I get a certain kind of result, and there's a satisfaction that comes with that they don't get with the digital sort of buzz feedback. It's the difference from a satisfying meal that you eat with a good balanced diet and a candy rush. And, you know, all kids like candy, it seems. They all like that rush. All kids like the digital rush, but they have to be exposed to other stuff that actually does capture their attention. And that's where the parents' ingenuity and creativity has to come in. You got to figure out what it is your particular child or your children, what's going to capture their attention and help them move in that direction. In our son's case, it was sports. Then he kind of got into cooking a little bit, got a little bit better at that. But it could be just about anything for a kid.
Mm-hmm. Kitty, I see a few questions more. The one that I see now is from Ingrid. Ingrid, is it okay for you to get yourself in the spotlight? Kitty, can you?
Well, I work for a governmental organization, and we support education of Dutch in the Dutch-speaking countries, but also all over the world. So in about 40 countries, there are universities who offer low country studies. So that means that I am able to offer online courses or online platforms where students, pupils, or teachers are sharing materials or experiences and or learning together. So I am wondering, do you have any advice how to integrate what we are fearing with artificial intelligence and with IT? So how can we integrate values like integrity, resonance, true connection into those tools? We see that they have a lot of disadvantages too. So that's my question, how to integrate what we miss, what we lack into the tools who are very present.
Beautiful
Right.
question. Thank you, Ingrid.
When it gets down to that level of concreteness, a philosopher is at a disadvantage. So I'll say that as upfront. But I think that one of the things that we can try to do is to create, if it's a digitally mediated environment, one in which we could develop an environment where what I refer to as open creativity rather than closed creativity is what the main objective of the session is. So closed creativity is associated with problem solution. You kind of know what you want as an end result, you just don't know quite how to get there. So it's closed in that sense of there's huge creativity involved, but it's a very specific kind of creativity. And what we need in the world today is more predicament resolution. We need young people to be coming on board. They could be citizens and consumers and workers, family members, friends, community workers, and so on, who are able to resolve the predicaments that are occurring at all these different scales, from the family scale on up to the societal scale. And that requires open creativity. So open creativity, you don't know where you're going. You don't have an end result. What you have as a kind of a benchmark is a relational quality that keeps you moving. And so I would take an analogy with music, and if you'll forgive me for doing that, with music making, improvised music, and then we can try to imagine together what would be involved in other kinds of educational environments where the improvisational instinct that you find in music making can be translated into other domains. So joint creativity. So what's going on with music making is, if it's really open-ended improvisation, you start off with nothing. There's no score. There's no chord changes in advance. There's no harmony decided in advance. One person plays a note, another one plays another note. You figure out how those resonate. A third note comes in, and you start moving forward together. And what you have is a shared sense of what's musical, and keep things moving musically. When something interesting happens, you repeat it. You run it through transmutations of it, and then you move out from there. And the point of an improvisation is not that you finish. The point of an improvisation is to extend the horizons of what can be anticipated in music making or in other endeavors. So why is that important in terms of education, and how might it help us to rethink the digital world and what we can do in education digitally? Well, we have operated since the late 15th century with a model of education started by a guy named Peter Ramus, who is a mathematician and a philosopher, who came up with this idea of the curriculum. Prior to that, people didn't use the word curriculum in an educational context, but a curriculum is a racetrack, a chariot racetrack. It's a competition that you engage in to see who can get to the end finished. So Ramus's idea, revolutionary against the studio apprenticeship model of learning, was, look, we can create, in a sense, algorithms for how we learn. We can create courses, these tracks that you go around with a predetermined product, learning outcomes, all the stuff that's now all the buzz in the education world. We get the learning outcomes, we have, these are the resources, you grade the students, you compare them, and it's one after another after another. To get your degree, you need to meet so many courses, you need to run around the track so many times, and that's all closed creativity stuff. The very model of education is about closed creativity. And so what we want to do is somehow open that up and say, if we had a model of education that was other than curriculum based, what would it look like? The old studio model is not practicable. having people engaging in these lifelong relationships like you might have with your Buddhist teacher, a lifelong relationship where you're nurtured along individually. That's not practicable to scale up for education of 1 million students or for 3 billion students worldwide. I mean, so we have to somehow play with that. But I think that that idea that we move away from the idea that what education is about is incorporating into ourselves, kind of being inculcated with certain forms of knowledge, chunks of knowledge that have been split up as such, and instead knowledge and learning being based on being able to intuit new relational pathways. And that's a really different way of understanding things. It's saying, I want the answer. What we then would be training students to do is to say, what we're trying to do is to find more and different ways of approaching this thing that somehow, in the way that new kinds of music give a kind of a joy that you don't get if you just play the same thing again and again. Learning a set piece is great, it's wonderful. But learning how to improvise prepares you to do that in other domains, whether it's cooking, socializing, politics, and so on. So I think if we can get education digitally to be aimed at producing environments within which open creativity can occur, where the differences of everybody involved can really be appreciated and used to create a greater sense of coherent collective intelligence, shared intelligence, then I think we're moving in the right direction. But if we do what it seems like is being done with digital education, which is delivery of the set content, set curricula, you sign up online, you take the course at your convenience. It's the same model of education curricular, but now married with the commercial values of convenience and control and so on. And I would really worry about that producing students, young people who are really able to engage the kinds of predicaments that we have in the world today.
Mm. We have to go to an end. This is called a lunch meeting, and most people have to do other things after 1 o'clock. And I wanted to take the opportunity to ask you one more question about being a teacher in these days. Right now, I'm in the Dutch town called Zwolle. I popped out of a meeting to meet you, talking to teachers about digital citizenship, digital literacy, but also being a teacher in times of intelligence, digital intelligence. And to finish this nice dialogue with you with the question, how to be a teacher and not be distracted by all those demands, people telling you that you have to be digital literate, that you have to know as much as your students know, that you have to be data literate, working with more and more algorithms. And what is it? How can you stay strong and be a teacher, stable and of meaning for students?
Yeah, I think this is where it comes down to the question that I kind of framed the book around, Buddhism and intelligent technology. And that question was, who do we need to be present as to ensure that the great and positive promise of intelligent technology is realized, while at the same time limiting the conditions or eliminating the conditions under which the real perils involved would be realized. And so the digital technologies, they're out there, they're going to happen, they're being used, they're being employed. What's the role of the teacher here? Well, I think the teachers will have to make use of these systems. The way things are going, especially in the pandemic and post-pandemic world, a kind of a shift has occurred. A groundswell shift has occurred. And I think that people will have to use more of these. And what's the role of the teacher in that? I don't think it's to be the data expert. I think the algorithms will be very good at matching students with content, for example. I think that the algorithms will get very, very good at being able to do paced learning, individualized paced learning for students. I think that's good. What I think the teachers will want to do is to work at two different registers. One is to look sort of at the institutional societal level and say, what are the values that we want these algorithmic systems to be instilling in our students? Let's work at the values content that's being involved there to ensure that that's steady across everybody. But then in working with the students, I think that the most important thing is to have a caring, compassionate presence. That's really what kids need. It's what young people need. It's what teenagers need. They need someone who listens to them and who cares about what they hear. And making that kind of a connection, this heart-to-heart connection, allows teachers and students to, hierarchy is important and it's good. But I think that the best teacher-student relationships are ones where many, many times, teachers and students stand side to side and work shoulder to shoulder together on something. And that really inspires the student to say, look, I'm not just the recipient of things. I'm a partner in this. I might be a very junior partner, but I'm a partner in this. And I think that the best teachers do that. They take what their students are interested in, what their students have as desires, as interests, and they say, hey, we can work with that. Let's take that and let's see where it goes. And I'll use an example. I did a philosophy in the schools program back in the early 1990s for elementary age students. And I was warned in the classroom before coming into this one classroom that there's a problem kid. He acts out, he can get violent. He has been held behind twice already, so he's 2 years older than the other classmates. He's a bigger kid. This is a 6th grade class. And if he's any problem, send another kid to the office and we'll have the principal send somebody to take him out of the room. Pre-warned about this bad kid. And indeed, the first thing we get into in the session was him challenging my authority. And I said, look, I know where you're coming from. I know what it's like. You need to prove something. Why don't we go prove it in your terms? Did you like football? They said, yeah, I like football. I love football. I said, let's go outside and see who could throw a football the furthest. If I can throw a football further than you, then you need to listen to me a little bit. And I'll listen to you a lot if you throw the football further than me. And we went out on the playing field. Luckily, my arm was still okay. Wouldn't be able to do it today, but I was able to throw the football further. And he was like, wow, okay, I'm with you, man. And I think that if he'd beat me, he'd still be with me because I took him seriously enough to say, look, we're going to devote some of the class time to helping you integrate into this environment. And after that, he was really helpful with the group. And he actually had some really interesting insights about what it's like growing up in a broken family and still trying to be a kid of his age, 12 years old, 13 years old. And I think that if we take the students seriously, that's the most valuable thing that we can do in terms of the compassionate, caring connection with them when the rest of the digital world is mediated in such a way that even their best friends won't talk about sensitive, deep subjects together. They need somebody to do that. And I think teachers are the place.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Peter.
Very young, the parents aren't.
Yeah. If my camera would have worked, I would have smiled at you. I'm doing that right now, but you can't see me. Thank you very much. Kitty, okay. Can I give you the final
Of
word?
Course. I'd like to thank Peter as well. Thank you very much. And of course, Remco, you as well for hosting this and reading the book. That wasn't a thin book, I think.
I can recommend it to everyone, even if you don't meditate or have a Buddhist background. It's relevant for everyone.
Thank you. And we will be distributing the link to this session if you would like to watch it again to everybody who participated. So that's coming to you. And I want to wish everybody a very nice day. And thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming.
And let me say thank you as well for inviting me and to let anybody know if you've got follow-up questions or comments that you might want to share. Feel free to email me. I think Remco can provide you with my email address, or you can look online at the East West Center. And I'm usually pretty good about responding to people's emails. So if there is something that kind of triggered off an association or a question and you want to follow up on it, I'm more than happy to do so.
Yeah, how about maybe people can send it to me and I'll collect them and then maybe send them to you. Is that an idea?
As you guys wish. I mean, I think sometimes people want the one-to-one and sometimes it's okay to put them together. But yeah, I mean, whatever people are comfortable with is fine.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Well,